Incoming transmission.
Well, lads, how are you doing? Am I in? I am in. I thought he's all in there already. There we go. How's that?
That works. I was going to let you introduce the show first and then bring us on, but okay, if you want to go straight into it.
Oh, that's usually well. They already know what the show's about. So, hey, everybody, how you doing? Welcome to the XO Chats, and we're here to talk about what is my favorite sci-fi show of all time, Babylon 5. So I was going to say hi, John. Hi, Russell. Thanks for joining me. As usual, if anybody wants to add any comments, ask any questions, just put it in the comments there, and we'll be happy to answer you on that. I still have space for anybody else who might like to join the chat. If anybody wants to, just let us know. So, yeah, without further ado, Babylon 5, the greatest sci-fi show ever made. What do you think?
Is it though?
Yes.
Is it?
I think one thing that always jumps me with Babylon 5 is its ability to show a future that was not only bleak but also, like saying, "Oh, this is what we could be." It had kind of the features of Star Trek. It had the features of like the dark showing of like what we are as a race. There was a lot of points that JMS pointed out very clearly. Like in the first season, there's the episode where he shows like, oh, well, there's one religion on Minbar, there's one religion on Centauri, there's one Narn religion, there's one Drazi religion, and then he has this line of hundreds of people, and he's introducing all the ambassadors to different leaders of faith from Earth, like showing, hey, Earth is much more diverse than you might expect. And it kind of like pointed out, it also said, hey, religion is a thing still in the future. We don't let it affect us as much as maybe, it does now, but there is a point where even religion was able to coexist on our planet, which I thought was even more like saying something about how much we had evolved as a race.
Do you think that's pointing the finger at what was left out of a lot of other sci-fi shows where like every planet is monocultural? Every other planet's gotten together, but Earth has just been so diverse. We're continuing that their diversity.
To a point. He also, the other thing is, to lead off of that, you have stuff like Minbar. You started looking more and more at Minbar as they go through the series, and you start seeing that there's this definite, like, rich cultural heritage. And sure, they may only have one religion, but it's obvious that they had, before Valen, they had something else that was much more complex, much more diverse. It was the fact that Valen coming in and unifying the castes into the council and saying, hey, we need to work as one race, not as three separates constantly warring amongst each other. There was a lot of symbolism, a lot of points with the Valen storyline, especially with the culture of Minbar, and like having the worker caste, and you never really heard about the worker caste, and then at the end, they're the leaders, they're the ones in charge, pretty much.
Because the other two ran away with themselves, even though they were supposed to all have an equal say.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. With particularly between the religious caste and the warrior caste, they were primarily the two main castes until you got to near the end of the show. But I mean, for me, one of the things I remember when that show came out, first of all, was you had a lot of Star Trek fans saying, "Oh, this is just a clone of Star Trek. This is just a cheap copy, and it's nothing original." And then as you got into the way JMS created the story, how he developed it, the characters he created, I mean, you're very, very quickly into the first season, and you realize it really isn't, because he's portraying people in a lot more of a realistic view than, we say, the idealistic idea that you might have had from a lot of the characters in Trek. So, for example, you had Sinclair in the first season, who had PTSD and was dealing with some issues. You had Garibaldi, who, for example, was a recovering alcoholic. You had Susan Ivanova, who had her family issues back in Russia. You had I suppose with Londo and Jakar, you had that relationship between an oppressor and the oppressed. The Centauri having conquered Narn for so many years, and they had just recently gained their freedom. You also had the fact that you had humanity in their arrogance going out into space and thinking, oh, we beat the Dilgar, we're really powerful, and then you come across the Minbari, a really ancient race, and get their asses kicked. So I think from the very beginning, you could see Babylon 5 was anything but a Star Trek clone, and was definitely something in its own right.
Well, it became that, and we all know that now. Of course, when you only see the first few episodes, when it first pops out on screen, everybody goes into a knee-jerk reaction. And of course, that was, 93, 92 when it came? What was the pilot?
Yeah. The pilot was 93, and then the first season aired in 94.
Right, so The Gathering was 93, and then the first episode was Something on the Line. What was the first name of the first episode?
Midnight on the Firing Line.
Midnight on the Firing Line, right. So that's the first 40-minute episode. But like Galactica 2003, you got The Gathering was made first as a TV movie, and then they got the series on after that.
And people forget that too. Like, people say that Babylon 5 is a clone of Deep Space Nine, and Deep Space Nine entered pre-production in basically right around the time when Gathering was released.
Right.
So, and the other thing is, JMS said multiple times, I sent this to Star Trek. I pitched it to be a Star Trek series, because JMS always said he had a dream, like a vivid dream, and when he woke up, he could still remember most of it, and he started writing it down, and then he filled it in from there, and that's basically the majority of the story. Now, mind you, with the stuff that he had happen with some of his actors, he had to switch stuff up, like bringing in Bruce Boxleitner and such. But
real world offset stuff, crept in and
I think, Russell, didn't he say when he was at that time that he did sort of put in trapdoors in case something like that happened? So he had his storyline.
Well, because he knew. The thing is, he knew. I'm terrible with names. The actor who played Jeffrey Sinclair had some major depression issues. Michael O'Hare. Yeah. He had some major depression issues, and it's something JMS had known about before Babylon 5. But when he envisioned what he wanted Sinclair to be, he's like, he's perfect. He is this character. He's perfect for it. I need to get him. And towards the end of the first season, you can see it when you're watching it. You can see something's on his mind as an actor, not just as the character. And that's why you ended up getting Bruce Boxleitner. It just got to a point where he couldn't handle the filming schedule.
I believe there was problems with run-ins with Jerry Doyle as well. There's infamous stories. You can go and check those out as well. So there was.
Jerry had the funny thing is, his character had an alcohol problem, and so did he. So, it kind of got around in there pretty bad at points.
And of course, Jerry. JMS was the only one who knew of Michael's issues at that time. Like his fellow actors weren't aware. So so there was that aspect to it as well. All things considered, he handled it pretty well considering just how ill he was. And JMS did leave it open for him to come back, and they managed to come along and bring him back for me, probably one of the finest two-parters. Well, I'm saying about a show that I think is the finest sci-fi show anyway, but one of the finest two-parters I've ever seen in War Without End 1 and 2,
But isn't that
really tied up those stories.
That two-parter is actually a three-parter.
Yes, it is, if you want to count it.
So it starts with Babylon Squared, and of course that was the storyline that everyone was surmising was going to be. And wasn't it the fact that Babylon 5 was supposed to get swallowed by the temporal anomaly, and Babylon 4 was going to replace it?
The original.
It's interesting. It's an interesting theory. Because considering that in the original script, we might say that Sinclair was meant to be there for the full 5 years. Things might transpire a little bit differently. Whether B4 was to replace B5, not too sure, but it's an interesting idea.
The original, like one of the original plot lines that got leaked, JMS used to be on what was it, IRC chat? Back in the day.
Yeah.
And he used to talk all the time to fans. And one of the things he said was, had he had O'Hare for the 5 years, one of his thoughts was to have it where Babylon 4 would return, and Babylon
Yeah.
5 would be transported back.
Ah,
And
okay.
the reason why is Babylon 4 was, for lack of intensive purpose, it was a battle station. Like, it was heavily armed, because by that point they'd already lost 3 stations due to sabotage or outright just somebody blowing it up.
Right.
So they're like, we need to do something, and they took it under the military as opposed to civilian manufacture, and the military built it. And with the military building it, they're like, no, we're arming this thing to the teeth.
Mm-hmm.
And then Babylon 5 came in, and then, you know, they got the diplomatic station.
They got the diplomatic station. Yeah, absolutely. And there was also the case where, you know, once that change was made, the fact that B4 was such a, without giving too much of the story for people who, for example, in Q4 are now starting to watch it, when B4 disappeared, it went somewhere where it needed that kind of armament. Like, so that kind of fit in with the story as well, you know. It just goes to show the level of writing and detail that Straczynski went into when he created the whole universe that is Babylon 5, you know.
Like, I saw one time somebody made a 3D rendering of, they took every episode of Babylon 5 and they made them like basically like a screenshot, and they just rotated it around a big circle, right?
Yeah.
And then each season was a different ring that went around in another, so it made a sphere. And then it showed basically a line that would go for an episode, and it would follow all the subplots. And when they got done with it, you couldn't see from one side of the sphere to the other through the center. Like, there's so many interweaved connection plot lines. Episodes will have small snippets from the first season that you just forget that are even there, that then come back up in the 5th. Like, it's crazy how much detail he did.
And of course, a lot of the stuff that he laid the plans for in season 1, once they lost Michael O'Hare and you know, different characters, like Talia had to be, Pat Talman was in the pilot. Then they brought in, what was the name of the other actress? I can't remember her name right now. And then they brought back, Pat Talman was brought back in season 4.
Yeah, 4, yeah.
You know, so, and Pat Talman was a stunt woman on Next Generation.
Yeah, she was. Oh, she was on a number of full episodes too. But
she was a security officer, all that type of stuff.
Yeah. Let's see, Talia Winter. She was played by, if I can find it.
Oh, that's right.
Andrea Thompson, wasn't it?
Andrea Thompson. Yep, that sounds right.
Just going to say hi to a couple of guys who popped in. Lee, hey, how you doing? Joanne says it's on my list to watch. Shameful to say that I haven't seen it yet. Well, yeah, but when you do, Joanne, trust me, you will be. You will love every minute of it. Absolutely. If you like good story.
Joanne. That's not Joanne. Facebook user. Facebook user.
It's Joanne on my little phone here. Nita Malone says hi. Hi, Nita. How are you? Antoinette, good evening. John, how you doing? Barry Clark is watching. Hi, Barry. Michael Nolan. Andrew Brannigan says story and character arcs were the best. Yeah, I would agree.
I think that's where they actually had superior points to Star Trek. Like Deep Space Nine, don't get me wrong, had a lot of character development, a lot of story arcs, but just how those story arcs go, it seems like what you expected Star Trek, the normal like progression, so to speak. They just concentrated on more characters than what you would normally expect in TNG. They concentrated on Riker a little bit, but mostly it was the Picard and Data show.
Yeah.
But you go into Deep Space Nine and you talk about Garrick, and people are like, "Oh yeah, the guy was so amazing," and then you realize he was only in like 20-something episodes.
Right. The guy, but they did the thing of bringing not characters, but bringing actors back. So the guy who plays Morden is one of the CNC operators in The Gathering.
Yeah. And they reused people a lot. I mean, yeah, it was amazing, like what they were able to do with those character arcs. The other thing is with the character arcs in Babylon 5, they're more real. They evolve through while you're watching more organically than I think in Star Trek. Sometimes Star Trek kind of gets a little bit of a forced push, you feel. Like the relationship between Ezri and Bashir at the end. It just seems kind of like, oh, she got pushed into it real quick. Whereas you have relationships in Babylon 5, like look at Jakar and Londo's relationship. I mean, it's a lot like Ducat's and Cisco's, but it has more of a feel of what you would expect from two people that are in close quarters that hate each other, that over time have to work together, and then they hit a bad spot, and then they come back out of it.
But it's Midnight in the Firing Line. Londo tells Garibaldi how he's going to die 5 seasons early.
Yeah.
You know, so it's like it's in not The Gathering, but in the first episode, Londo says, "We all Minbari, we see, or all Centauri, we see how we're going to die, and I will die with someone's hands wrapped around my throat."
Actually, that's Sinclair. He says that too.
Was it Sinclair?
Yeah, because Sinclair goes into Londo's quarters to try and ask him to come to some sort of agreement, because they were trying, in that first episode, the Narns have attacked a Centauri agricultural colony that used to be owned by the Narns. So that was the whole story there in that first episode. But so Sinclair says to him, we think we can do something here to try and maintain the peace. And Londo's like, no, and I've already, but then, yes, he had this dream that himself and Jakar would be at each other's throats 20 years from now. And,
but he didn't say it was Jakar. It was, he said, I see a man. So he
never said it. He never said it was Jakar, but he knew it. Because he also knew he would be the Emperor. Because he knew he was in, when you see the scene of what they show, he's in the Emperor's Remnant. He has the Gorget.
But that just goes to show you the level of planning. Like, I mean, that's the very first episode in the very first season,
Yeah.
And Londo doesn't become emperor until the 5th season, So you can turn around and say the writing, the way he had his Bible, he started here, he ended there, and he had everything in the middle, and he knew exactly where he was going, But
that's JMS's style, because which was
pretty revolutionary for American TV back then.
Well, and we see one of the places JMS was working before he got Babylon 5, where he was a writer and a showrunner. He was working in the cartoons, and in the last year or so, I watched some of his earlier stuff. Now, when they were on Netflix. They're now since gone, but JMS was a showrunner in the earlier episode, season 1 of The Real Ghostbusters.
Yep.
And season 1 of The Real Ghostbusters has a very odd number. It's got 77 episodes in The Real Ghostbusters. There's a story with JMS there, and he also was part of the opening run of She-Ra, connected to He-Man, and the first 4 episodes of She-Ra are actually a He-Man She-Ra crossover, and it's not a kid's 20-minute or even 10-minute attention span story like, boom, here's your hero, go have some fun.
Yeah.
There's an hour and 20 minutes of how She-Ra becomes a hero, and that's JMS writing the opening of She-Ra. So, and I watched that when it was on Netflix recently, and even though, it's like, oh, boys don't watch She-Ra, which was a thing back then, the storyline is actually really good on how she gets the power and stuff like that. But that's where JMS was writing. He was writing arc storylines into other shows years before he got onto B5. And there was actually, when he left Real Ghostbusters, they would brought in this like marketing strategy company, which were a bit right wing and had religious kind of affiliations. And they had changed changes for Ghostbusters, Real Ghostbusters. So Janine had to be softened. That's where her horn-rimmed glasses became softer and rounder. She became the mammy or the big sister to the 4 boys. And then when that company was gotten rid of and JMS was asked back, he didn't come back fully. He said, I want to write an episode. And the episode that he wrote was an episode explaining why Janine had changed suddenly from season 1 or from season 2 or something into season 3, where she'd be, horn-rimmed glasses, bit of a punk look to her, and then suddenly she was really soft and soft-spoken and all that. So he wrote a story explaining that, to say that she'd been possessed by a benevolent spirit for the last few years, which needed to be exorcised to be released without harming either the ghost or Janine. So he always had this, we're not just going to write a story, forget about it, and then write another story, but that means nothing next week. he was always wanting to connect stuff. He loved he was a big fan of Lord of the Rings and all the connected stories that took a long time to tell.
Oh yeah, like I mean, he's quoted the likes of Blake Seven and Lord of the Rings as influences on the way he wrote and developed Babylon 5, you know. Michael Nolan just said there, even their third arc characters like Zack had great human arcs and would not be out of place today. And it says, absolutely. In fact, a lot of the storylines that you have in Babylon 5 certainly wouldn't be out of place today.
Talking about the human character arcs, I was going to point out the Zack and Zack and Garibaldi's friendship, and then also Zack and Lita Alexander's kind of angsty relationship that had started. But yeah, like there's a lot of times in like Star Trek and other sci-fi and just dramas in general, you see a guy have a crush on a girl, and then somewhere along the lines, they're gonna go on a date at some point.
Yeah, right.
Zack never gets that. Like, I mean, the only other time I remember seeing something like that right in recent history has been Game of Thrones with King of the Friend Zone, Jorah Mormont. Like, never gets a shot. Like.
Yeah, I mean, JMS was brilliant for that in the way he wrote character and developed their stories. I mean, when you look at Londo and Jakar in the first season or even in the pilot, and you look at them at the end of the show, they are two completely different individuals, you know, changed by their experiences through the course of the show, you know. So there is actual serious development in the characters there. And it's the same with all the other characters as well, like Lanier and Delenn and, you know, Garibaldi. They all grow and change and evolve through the course of the show, and I think that's definitely one of the strengths to it. You know, I do know that one of the criticisms that some people put towards it was the special effects, and I kind of like. I mean, I don't. You know, I can understand if you're looking at if you're not going to compare budgets like to say what DS9 had or TNG had and what Babylon 5 had to work with and how they managed to get around this much smaller budget that they had. But they came in at the very genesis, the very beginning of CGI and TV.
Right.
You know,
and the Babylon 5 computer generated the CGI wasn't created on the top spec computers of the day either. They were on the best Amiga, not an Amiga 500 now or anything like that, but the best Amigas that you could get at the time. That's what it was created on. So what they were doing was really pushing the boat.
For what they were able to do with the equipment they had access to and the software they had, they actually did really, really well. Right. And I think in some ways, and this is the funny thing, they haven't been remastered yet, so you can't say for sure. But if you watch Deep Space Nine as a good example, because it hasn't been remastered either. If you watch Deep Space Nine on a 720 or 1080p output, and you watch Babylon 5, the effects work better for Babylon 5 than they do for Deep Space Nine. They hold up better because Deep Space Nine, you see the glitches, you see the problems when they're trying to mesh digital with practical.
Right.
Where
on that topic, though, I mean. Yeah, this is one. I think I brought this up before on another podcast, another stream video that we did, because it's something that I would just as a former video quality control operator, it's something that bugs the crap out of me, especially when I watch Babylon 5 DVDs on that because and I wonder, it's the question: would it ever get remastered? Was it successful enough financially? Because that was Babylon 5's problem, was scraping at as much money as they could get. Because as I've said before, like the CG was rendered for 4:3.
Yeah.
And especially the layovers, the PPG shots, the CG characters, anytime you saw Vorlons in shots, or anytime there was any sort of computer generated graphic laid on top of what was shot on set, if this is the frame, I always try to do this, it was rendered in 4:3, which is a lot of people refer to as square. So then when they put it on DVD, that had to be cropped again. So that's how much information you're losing from in the Babylon 5 CG stuff. So when you throw it up on that, I immediately know, and I've said it before, I can tell in an edit as soon as they cut from what they scaled up from the ingest on film and widescreen when they made the DVDs, And when there's going to be a CG shot or going to someone shoot a PPG, I can instantly go, it's going to be effect shot, because it goes from quite clear for DVD quality to mush and then pop back out again in the edit. And that's simply because they just didn't have the budget to redo the effects, to re-ingest, scan over, do it again. Which is such a pity. Such a pity.
Yeah.
Oh,
The
yeah.
other problem with that. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, you do as well. Yeah. I mean, I imagine it's your professional eye, because I mean, when I watch the DVDs, you know, it doesn't trouble me all that much, but I suppose I'm just so I'm so absorbed with what I'm watching in the story. It just, I suppose it's like watching the cheap, special effects on Blake 7. It doesn't really bother me once I'm engaged in the story, you know. Just to see Anne Grace at the end story arc is an absolute awesome one for her, and absolutely fantastic. Mike Nolan says, "Poor old Lanier."
Lanier.
And Andrew Brannigan said Andrea was Jerry Doyle's wife as well.
I can't remember whether they were divorced during or after the show, because they did separate at some stage, and I can't remember whether they were actually.
I think they were separated during the show, and then the divorce went through final after the show.
Right.
I'd been on Jerry's radio show a couple times as a guest when he wanted to talk about sci-fi, because I actually knew Jerry Doyle personally when I was down in Vegas, and he would talk very highly of her. So I mean, it doesn't seem like it was a bad break, just two people. But like effectively what I see the problem with like Babylon 5 getting it rendered up is the problem you're talking about right there, is the fact that they did a double crop when they did the DVDs. So now the only way to do a remaster proper on that is to go back to the original film and then redo all the shots from scratch.
Same thing as they did with the Next Generation.
Yeah,
exactly the same thing. And as far as I believe, I did that break even. I don't know if that project even made.
It made them a little bit of profit.
Did it?
It did not make them what they projected was the problem, which is why Deep Space Nine probably will never get one. And if we get a Voyager one, it'll be AI. When the technology for the AI remasters becomes cheap enough, you'll get it. Deep Space Nine kind of runs into the same problem as Babylon 5, is they did double cropping, and you're going to lose. It's just, you're going to have artifacting. There's no way you can clean it up, or when the AI cleans it up, it looks like Uncanny Valley, which is a problem.
Right. Yeah, because I have a problem when they use an AI for post-processed 3D, home video 3D, because I love my 3D, but there's a thing where as far as I understand, there's two versions of Avatar. Avatar being like the kickoff movie for the redo of 3D, and the whole point of it was, when Cameron made it, he wanted depth. It wasn't about, shit coming out the screen at you. It was all about what is in this direction, in the screen, right? But the copy in 3D that I have, there's a moment you can check where they're on the mountaintop. They're in the research base, the separated one that they've had to chop her up when they're escaping everything. And on the refrigerator door, on the fridge door, there's photographs on the fridge door, and the door is glass. Now you should be able to see 3D into the fridge because of glass door, but the photographs are two-dimensional photographs. They're two-dimensional in the cinema. They're proper printed photos. If you get an AI post-processed home video copy in 3D, those photos are 3D rendered on your home TV. And that type of thing annoys the crap out of me, because it's a computer rendering it out without a human eye going, no, that's not right. That has to be done again. These are the perspectives. This is for that, So that'd be my worry for stuff like, especially upscaling B5 stuff like that,
Yeah. Well, look, I mean, as much as I'm such a huge fan of it, I know that it wasn't successful enough to ever get that anyway. So the DVDs that we have are what we're going to have, I reckon, and that's it. But
the other thing too, I was going to say, to add on to that, was JMS. He liked the fact of, he was less about the special effects. That was more the network wanted it, because they we have to have space battles and all this. And he's like, well, I'm going to have space battles, but I'm more wanting to tell this story. Like
Yeah.
JMS was very much, I want to tell the story. So when he got to the point of budget, if he had a choice between bringing on a better, more expensive actor for a guest spot, he was more willing to do that than to invest more into his special effects budget.
Right.
And
Right.
that shows in his casting when you look at some of the guest stars he had compared to the guest stars you saw in like other sci-fi and other shows at the time.
Right. And you guys, can you, Frank, especially you've watched it probably more than the rest of us. I've watched it about 4 or 5 times over the last 20 years. But can anybody remember all the references to other sci-fi shows? Can you pick them all out?
What do you mean by references?
So I'll give you the two that instantly come to my mind. The first one being Jakar's personal pistol is from Space 1999.
Yeah.
And the Drazi ships are all the Liberator.
Yes, that's great. I do remember that one. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I think there are, he's had some different references to other sci-fi shows. The episode where they have the merchants shop, the merchandise shop comes down to B5, and there's a scene there where Ivanova goes, is showing this to Sheridan, and Sheridan goes, I think it's Sheridan, I can't remember, it's Ivanova, Sheridan goes, this is not some sort of deep space franchise. This station means something. And that was obviously going on while all the toing and froing was going on with who came first.
Yeah,
the chicken or the egg, or B5 and or Deep Space Nine,
JMS also went near to the ground in regards to who was buying the show as well, because they were always struggling for money. And I think the priority channel for communications with the commander or the captain ended up being Channel 4, because that was the station that had purchased it on this side of the Atlantic.
Oh yeah, I know. I watched it religiously on Channel 4. What's this here now? John Hardy's The Engineering Story. You get to see their side of the war. Yeah. And Grace just saying, oh, there's the Liberator again. Yeah, absolutely. But one thing about it, though, I think the special effects from season 1 to season 5, you could see they were getting better all the time. By the time you got to season 3, where they were really getting into the whole war aspect, the Shadow War had really exploded and all that kind of stuff. They had reached a point where they were able to portray that in a manner that still looks amazing today, so, and in some ways, stands up even better than some of the Deep Space Nine stuff, particularly when they were using models. I know that by the time we got to the 4th season of Deep Space Nine, a lot of the guys who did the special effects in Babylon 5 went over there, and you could see their influence on all of a sudden Deep Space Nine were able to have huge space battles. Instead of just a few ships here and there, all of a sudden they had fleets, But absolutely.
That was more Paramount kind of going, those guys have been released from Babylon 5. Quick. That season 4 had aired and season 5 had just finished up, and they were like, well, quick, go buy those, go hire those guys, and it was Foundation Imaging, I think, as far as I remember.
But as well as that, of course, with Babylon 5, when they talked about the, creating the sci-fi show, they did try to, stay within the realms of reality. So, like, for example, humanity hadn't developed artificial gravity at this point, which is why the station spins. Which is why you see, in the big cruisers, the center section of the cruiser spin to create gravity, and then the design of, say, the Star Fury, even NASA were so impressed by the how that looked and how it was designed, they actually looked at it as a potential for a real vessel that they could work on.
Well, that was because at least the designers for that, because of all the kind of real world, not so much constraints, but the real world ideas that JMS was putting into it. The Star Fury was, it had all those points, all those thrusters for all the RCS thrusters for being able to do those type of maneuvers of just flip it over, rotate, or cut the engines, use drift, and continue firing as you drift backwards, then kick the engines in and go again. So those kind of maneuvers were thought out really quite well, and that's why it had 4 spurs as well for the engines. So the Star Fury.
I think it was actually Russell who mentioned it as well in one of our Q Forward chats. The Star Fury was a space vessel. It didn't
Yes.
or couldn't, or it might have been David, but I can't remember. It couldn't operate in a
Atmosphere.
an atmospheric environment. So
Right.
later in the show, you do see the Mark
Thunderbolts.
II, Star Furies, which were designed for atmospheric as well as space combat.
Yeah.
But you can tell that
like,
they were definitely not superior to the Star Fury. Like you
Yeah.
could tell just because like when you look at it, it's like the amount of transition that would have to be done in order to get a firing arc or a firing solution on anything was far greater on a greater time needed on a Thunderbolt than what was needed on a Star Fury.
on the Star Fury. Yeah.
Yeah. So like Star Fury would wipe the floor with a Thunderbolt, like quicker than heck. Yeah, just because I mean they're able to turn quicker and bring their forward weaponry into bear quickly because they have less transition point where you have this long nose going off of where all the RCS controls were. You'd have to swing this big nose around, whereas the Star Fury it's right in the center.
Wasn't the Thunderbolt a dual cockpit as well, one behind the other? I think it was two.
They've shown them with both. They've shown them with a single cockpit and a double cockpit.
Yeah, right.
So the first time I think we see them, the CGI, they were a single cockpit, and then later on, it's always the double cockpit, like when they went and did the sorties on Mars and such like that, and the attacks in like season 4. Like
it became more like they had a dual purpose. They were bombers as well as fighters.
Yes.
Right.
The other thing, as far as like the artificial gravity, there were some things that he put in there that gets vaguely talked about a little bit, like looking at the like Precari ships is a good example. They were the big green lumbering behemoths kind of floating around, look like fish. They were the Precari ships, and if you look carefully at the CG model, the windows are going down. Like they're rectangular windows instead of being like you'd expect to see like this, they're vertical. So the decks are vertical in that ship, going from the fore to the aft. And the idea was why you never saw those ships stop in place is because that's how they had gravity.
Oh, they were continuous movement with inertia.
Yeah, they were using inertial gravity controls basically. By moving forward, they were creating inertia.
There's a question. Was G-force an issue with the Star Fury? I don't think it was because it wasn't. It didn't. It couldn't be used in an atmospheric environment. So anytime you saw a Star Fury being deployed, it was either from a battle cruiser or from a station. So it was already in the vacuum of space. So I don't think G-force would have been an issue for it. It certainly didn't seem to be in any of the.
It shouldn't have been. It shouldn't have been, but they show it being an issue more than once. Like when they eject escape pods and such like that, you see them get hit and they rumble, and they're like responding to getting hit, which you would to a point, but not to the extent at which they're showing. Like you're strapped into the seat, you would expect that seat, like board plank or whatever it is, would have some sort of motion dampening in it since you're just mounted to it. So the ship would move and then you wouldn't, being in that board, so to speak. It would be dampened. But I mean,
that's the artistic license I take it there, just to give you that little bit more excitement in the midst of a battle,
That's exactly it. Because if you watch someone do real world, space maneuvers and all that type of stuff, it'd be like watching the two lads arriving in the Dragon capsule to the ISS. Which is interesting for those of us, interested in that particular space adventure. But in a TV show, you need to have them like the ships hit. You have to have people bouncing around. If you're accelerating or being blown out or something, you have to stick to the thing. You have to show that that's something happening. You're not going to hit eject and go, lovely time, 2001 Space Odyssey, and I'm ejecting from the thing.
Well, I mean, speaking of the Star Fury, I watched only the other night there, Lost Tales, for the first time in quite some time. I had only not long before that watched Legend of the Rangers, but with I remember when the Lost Tales came out, there was comments that they were so tight in the budget that you can see when you're looking at it that some of the set design was very cheap, and they used darkness and all that kind of stuff. And it was obvious though watching it that they had spent a lot of their budget on the special effects, because Babylon 5 looks phenomenal in Lost Tales. I mean, the up close shots, you see a couple of ships coming in and docking, and it looks absolutely amazing. And the episode, the episode with that focuses with Lockley and the demonic possession was definitely the bottled episode where they saved as much as they could regarding the production of that. But then the second episode that involved Sheridan and Galen, there were some fantastic scenes in that, like the scene where Sheridan takes out the Emperor to be, shall we say, from Centauri out on a Star Fury run, and you really get to see some up and close shots of the Star Furies in action. It was like,
well, I remember watching the behind the scenes for that, and again, going back to the thing, the effects they were able, the effects that they did back in 90, 92, 94, that era, by the time they made the Lost Tales, they could render that on the graphics card on the computer they were using to do the effects for the Lost Tales. So they got to the point where they could actually animate and see what the animation was going to look like using wireframes live on the computer right in front of them. How does that look? Okay, animate that, and they could see it. Whereas back then they had to actually set it off, render it. Fuck, it didn't work. Or great, yeah, that works. Let's just keep going with that. Oh, there's a problem with that one, but nobody will spot it. Just move on. So computer generated graphics have moved on so much better from that. And I also think I said before on one of our streams that I thought I know there were episodes that they didn't get to make when they were making them, but I thought he missed a trick in regards, his usual arc storyline between those three. And while you couldn't afford to have all your actors returning for more than, for 3 episodes, and you could only do 2 at a time, excuse me, I thought they missed a trick by, you have Sheridan, you could have had Sheridan escorting the Emperor, and then he'd be handed off. And then they go and do the next 2 familiar characters intertwined with that story, and then have the Emperors traveling through the episodes as the B storyline, the connecting storyline, but you're concentrating on the characters in front before that. And excuse me, I always thought that the demonic possession episode reminded me so much of The Exorcist 3. Which was Brad Dourif. It was, I've said it before, it's almost, it's a shortened version of The Exorcist 3. It's almost like AMS saw The Exorcist 3 and said, I want to make that, but I want to do it better.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's interesting. I haven't seen Exorcist 3, but it's been years since I watched The Lost Tales, and I have to say I thoroughly enjoyed watching that there recently. I would really, really, I want to go back and watch the whole lot again, which I wanted to do anyway after the Q4 thing that we did, But going back to the characters, so over the years we've had some amazing characters. So, question for you: Sinclair or Sheridan?
Oh, well, I have to go with on our usual dividing line, I have to go with Bruce, because I just liked the lighter element of Bruce. He was, because I think it's Michael O'Hare was the darker element, but also I think the first episode I ever saw was when Jer Keating was doing the Shakari Club, and we were upstairs somewhere else. And the first episode I got to see was Severed Dreams, and I didn't know a thing about what was going on. And it wasn't until years later that I actually caught up and rewatched the show. So I saw Severed Dreams and I saw A War Without End, but I saw them as kind of like everyone's really excited to see these episodes, and that's where I became the popcorn chewing person who doesn't know what's going on. So I'm going to watch the excitement because I haven't a clue about the arc storyline.
Yeah.
It wasn't until very later on that I actually got a chance to go back and watch, because at the same time, back then, I did not have the British channels. I only had the Irish channels, and if it wasn't on RTE, I didn't get to see it. Until '95 we didn't have a VCR, so there was no getting it recorded off someone else, handing me the VCR, the tapes, and I'd watch it. So the Shakari Club and what Jer was doing and all the video days was very much the only time I actually got to see anything that wasn't aired on RTE or on a particular time frame. where it wasn't the middle of the night on a school night, you know. So yeah, it's I had to come. I didn't. I think it was coming up to the end, nearly the 20. It was nearly the 21st century, where I got to sit down and watch Babylon 5 properly.
All right. Okay.
For
What about yourself,
me,
Russell?
for me, it depends on how you look at it. If you go by actor, I think Michael Hare was the superior actor. As far as the character I personally like, it's hard because the way I look at it is you can't take their arcs into account after you start seeing them, because when you do that, you run into the problem of one had 4 seasons of character development, one had 1. So it's really easy to say, oh, well, it was Bruce Boxleitner with Sheridan. Sinclair, I think, had a better backstory. The fact that he was at the Battle of the Line, he had basically gotten to the point of saying, you know what, we're not going to win this, whatever. I'm going to do whatever I can to make him hurt, and runs into the whole Delenn line with him. And then you have Bruce, who, when you go and you get to Sheridan's character, so to speak, you see, oh, well, Sheridan was a war hero, but he was the successful war hero.
Yeah.
Sheridan was a war hero because he survived the Battle of the Line. Sheridan was a war hero because he was the first person to actually take out a Minbari vessel.
Right.
Yeah.
And it was
and that was also, he didn't particularly just blast it out of the sky. He outmaneuvered a Minbari vessel. He outfought the commander of the Black Star.
Yeah. He basically had done all these things, and it's like, well, I understand his story, and it led into a lot of options, like the fact that the warrior caste hated his guts. The reason why he was basically, always kind of, when him and Delenn became something, it lessened Delenn's power in their own government, because the warrior caste were less likely to actually hear her out, because they're like, you're being influenced by this guy. Leave us alone. We don't want to deal with him. So I think Sinclair as a character, for the backstory, I think it had a little bit more of what JMS was looking for, so to speak. The fact that we were, as a race, we came out of the Dilgar Wars. We were the big man. We were, we're the unifying force of the galaxy, just like it was in Star Trek. And then they run into the Minbari.
Yeah.
And they end up having to come back all the way to the homeworld with their tail between their legs, and come to the realization, our entire race in that story came to the realization that they're all dead, that this race is going to stop at nothing. They're going to destroy us. They're going to remove us from the galactic face. And then all of a sudden they stop, and it's like, why'd they stop? Nobody knows. So it's always this, what I kind of got a feeling of, that they really didn't push too much past the first season, was there was probably a feeling in a lot of people's minds that the Minbari to stop, but what's to stop them from coming right back and just jumping in and blowing up Earth? We don't know why they stopped. So maybe they just stopped because they have to go home to harvest corn. Who knows? There was this very much of, the Minbari are a race that you don't fuck with.
Yeah. Even the Centauri knew that.
You don't mess with them. And it comes in later when Clark's forces move in on Babylon 5, when she jumps in with the White Star and 3 Minbari cruisers and says, you are in front of me, they are behind me. The only person to ever defeat a Minbari vessel in pitched combat is behind me. You're in front of me. Be somewhere else.
Be somewhere else.
You're like, right back into the jump.
Exactly.
What a great close-up for Miracle as well.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, for myself, for me, it was Sinclair. I mean, but unlike John, I did have Channel 4, so I watched it from the beginning. So I saw all of the first season when it first aired, went into the second season. I'm like, who's this guy? Why is Scarecrow and Mrs. King on Babylon 5? But as the show went on, I grew to appreciate his character and the story that they created for him as a replacement for Sinclair. But for me, Sinclair, I agree, was a stronger actor, because I think for me, the Sheridan character was the Captain Kirk. You know what I mean? He came in all gung ho, ready to go and all of that. Whereas Sinclair, you had this deeper character who had his issues, was trying to figure out what the hole in his mind was, what happened at the Battle of the Line when he lost consciousness for 24 hours, and all of that mystery that was being developed. The strange sort of relationship that seemed to be developing with Delenn, there was so much mystery and intrigue being developed around his character, which when he came out of the show, they resolved brilliantly with War Without End. But that obviously was intended to last,
much
through
longer.
the
Oh yeah.
entirety nearly of the season of the show. So it would have been amazing to have seen how that would have played out. But that's the way TV works, and with Michael's issues and the rest of it, they brought in Bruce, and the rewriting and the way they restructured it, it flowed perfectly. But for me, Sinclair, I would have loved to seen Sinclair finish the storyline, but either way, I like both, and it's like it took
in your mind.
Yeah,
Frank, just looking at some of the comments here, before they start passing away, and Barry saying, "Always liked the Shadow Proclamation." Barry, I think that's a Doctor Who thing. The Shadow Proclamation. There is the Shadow, but I think the Shadow Proclamation. I think that's a Doctor Who thing. That's the rules that the galaxies have to abide by, and Doctor Who, the Doctor makes you abide by that. But anyway, Barry also says the chapel on Babylon 5 reminded him of the chapels you find in hospitals. And,
yes.
I think for Anne was agreeing with you there as well. And there's a question for like the female members of the audience. Took her longer to appreciate Bruce as he was Scarecrow from Scarecrow and Mrs. King. But that's also probably one of the reasons why he was hired. Is he was known for the Scarecrow and Mrs. King. He had quite a serious female.
Absolutely. He had a recognizable face. Yeah,
recognizable face, but a big female following from that particular show. So that would bring people to watching the show as well. So.
And it's kind of the same thing. You have Deep Space Nine. They had, Hawk. They pulled him in to be Captain Hawk, and then over the course of 4 seasons, he turned his character into Hawk.
Yeah, exactly. That's it.
And Andrew Brannigan says the Sheridan Starkiller, the Warrior cast called him. That's right. From what was the name of the movie?
Which
where
one?
we see that? Huh?
In the beginning?
In the beginning, yes. Thank you. I just lost it there for a minute.
Surprised you forgot about that, man.
I love Into the Beginning.
Know who you are? Yeah.
For the first scene of Into the Beginning, it just kills it for me. The fact of you see these children running around in the Centauri Palace, and then he starts talking about like all the way back at the beginning, post Still War Earth, and you see you see just how arrogant humanity had become because they won the Dilgar invasion, and then adding into the stuff you see on Midnight on the Firing Line and Gathering, you're like, oh, now it makes sense.
So here's the question for both of you. For someone who's never watched it before, should you watch In the Beginning because it tells the start of the story, then The Gathering, then the show, or should you watch the show?
I say watch The Gathering first.
Yeah.
The Gathering,
right in the firing line, continue on, and then In the Beginning after what's the name
Season
of that?
3.
Yeah.
That's season 3 or season 5?
I would say
season 3, I think.
Because I think it's you go through, you watch everything in the series up to the end of season 4, in between season 4 and season 5, and then you watch the Abomination one, the Inner Space one.
Third Space,
that one. Yeah, the Abomination. Hey, it has Ian McShane in it though, so
that's always a win.
But like that one is in between, and then you come back for season 5, and then you basically watch Lost Souls, or I think it's Lost Souls, and then
A Call to Arms, then, which was the Crusade intro.
Yeah, and then you start watching into Crusade, then you have the Lost Years or whatever, the one with the demon and all that.
Yeah.
and then you run, and then at the very end of all that is where I say you watch In the Beginning. The
Yeah.
reason why is just a big one is Londo's arc. You get a lot of juxtaposition, and when you're watching on the series of what exactly is going on with Londo, there's a lot of kind of mystery on what exactly happens to Londo, and knowing up front that he is the emperor, so to speak, is kind of like, oh, okay, well, now it lessens him in the beginning. Because in the beginning, I mean, this looks like he basically looks like one of the ambassadors that got put on Nimbus 3.
Yeah. That's what
like,
he is.
You got shoved here. We don't want you. We want you out of the court. Get out of here. And he's a compulsive gambler and drinker, and it's like, well, he goes from that and works his way.
Yeah, I mean, well, I think from that aspect of it, even from the first season with that dream sequence, all of a sudden, he's going to be emperor. You see him, in that getup. So, very early on in the show, this is coming for him.
True.
It's in his future. So, part of the joy of watching it, particularly the first time around, is seeing how he gets there. It's coming because they foreshadowed that very early on in the show that he's going to be emperor. So, you don't I don't think Into the Beginning is going to ruin that for you. But yeah, but just to see how he is in that movie, yes, because you're better off watching the show, seeing how he gets there, and the type of person that he is when he is at that position.
I think Craig, so I mean, I've asked that question. Anne is saying, can you post the watching order on Q Forward? But I think by the 2 points that the two of you have made, the viewing order is a little bit subjective. Because the production order, which we all had to wait to see these the Lost Tales, the Lost Souls, Third Space in the beginning, how they were all released, and then the Lost Tales. We didn't get the chance to choose how we saw all those stories. No, they were all written in a certain order to kind of fill in pockets of.
If you watch it for chronological,
there for a second, John, to say hi to Shaqiri man himself, Jared Keating, who's popped in. The very man himself. We used to watch videos of Babylon 5 and Deep Space Nine when we were meeting in our early days, and Jared was the man that was running it. So, how you doing, Jared? Good to see you there, man. Sorry. I just wanted to say hi to Jared because.
Yeah, no, hey Jared, how are you, man? It was
Jared Keating himself and John met.
Jared's efforts way back in the 90s is how a lot of us got
the other reason I was going to say behind In the Beginning being later is just you have. There's a lot of stuff in there about the characters that without knowing what's going on a little bit, it lessens the effect that In the Beginning has. If you get what I'm saying. Like the suggested, and I'll post it, and is The Gathering, then seasons 1 through 4 to episode 8 in season 4. Then you watch Third Space.
Yeah.
Then you watch the rest of season 4 through, and then In the Beginning. Then all of season 5 through to episode 21, in which case you watch River of Souls and then Legends of the Rangers. Then you watch the rest of season 5. Then you watch A Call to Arms. Then you watch all of Crusade. And then at the end, you watch The Lost Tales, Voices in the Dark. That's the suggested kind of accepted viewing order that has been around for a number of years now. I think this was posted back in 2014 or something like that.
Right. Yeah, don't forget that. So the other thing as well is for all of us, we knew that. What is the name of the last episode? Say it again.
The last episode, Sleeping in Light.
Sleeping in the Light.
Yeah.
Sleeping in the Light was shot at the end of season 4, and then when they at the last minute got the announcement, "Oh, you're getting season 5," they withheld it and held it for an entire season.
Yeah.
To air at the end of season 5.
Season 5 was such a last-minute reprieve.
Yeah.
That's an issue. Andrew pointed out that Major Barrett, you shall be emperor. So, and that was the first season episode as well. So, it is foreshadowed very early in the show that he is going to be emperor.
It's not so much that he's going to be emperor; it's the fact that he's going to be emperor at a time when Centauri is ablaze. Like the entire planet is basically on fire and you see that, and that's why the Emperor wants all the windows closed. And
Yeah.
you then we're going to go through the entire series going, what happened? Why is Centauri on fire? Why is Centauri on fire? I've always thought it feels better when you understand what's happening and why
Yeah,
the
exactly.
Emperor is the
Yeah,
way he is.
yeah.
And then you also have the Keeper. Knowing about the Keeper helps with some of the stuff that he's doing, like the fact that he's drinking and he's like, "Oh, I only have so much time."
Yeah. Well, that's it exactly. You know, for me, I would always say watch it in the order it ran when it originally aired. Is what I would basically go with, like, you know. So, but there, as everybody said there, it is quite subjective now how you would watch it.
The
But
other thing
my
is
own
that
thing
one
is,
I posted in Q forward. That is the one that JMS recommends too.
oh, okay.
The
So-
2014 list, is it?
Huh?
Is that the one from 2014 you were saying? Is that
Yeah.
right?
It's the one you can pretty much find if you just directly search. It's the one I remember seeing when I first wanted to do a full rewatch. It's basically a graphic and it shows squares and it has little arrows going down through.
Right,
But it was originally from the Lurker's Guide. But
yeah. Well, I was just about to pop that up there, John. Looks like we might have met Andrew Brannigan long before the Cucullin. He was at the Shackery Club as well, watching those.
He was in the DCU Sci-Fi Club, where that's one of the reasons. That's where Jer ran his first couple of Babylon 5 guests for us in Ireland, but I was too young to go with those. I didn't know about Babylon 5. I know Michael came. I know Peter Jurassic was the guest that Jer had over. I know at one stage he was trying to get Walter, but unfortunately that fell through. And it was because Jer had run those in DCU. It was one of the reasons why VisiCon back in '96 was run in DCU. Unfortunately, while it might have been a success for the Babylon 5 sized events, it wasn't the best choice for VisiCon in hindsight. And of course, that was at the time. That was right in the middle of the show. That was War Without End had just aired in '96. We got the episodes at VisiCon.
A good few of us went actually to see it in their big auditorium for the first time at VisiCon. A whole lot of us left the party to go and watch that two-parter. Yeah, it was amazing. But that's a great segue there, because I wanted to, you know, Andrew put up the comment there about Majel Bard playing the Emperor's wife and being a type of some sort of a prophet, and so you had that Star Trek, you know, alumni. What's the word I'm looking for? Personage
alumni.
on Babylon 5. Aluminum. But Walter Koenig though as Bester, what a joy! What an amazing character for him to get a hold of and really run with, because, you know, as fantastic as he was as Chekhov in Star Trek, you know, he didn't get an awful lot to do. He got a hell of a lot more to do as Bester on Babylon 5. And it was in a way, it was kind of lucky, because originally he was supposed to play Mr. Grey in the first season episode, where an Air Force officer brings a telepath to interrogate Sinclair about what happened on the Battle of the Line. And that telepath, played by Jeffrey Combs, was meant to be played originally by...
Another amazing actor.
Oh, another amazing actor. Was originally meant to be played by Walter Koenig. But JMS really wanted to get Walter on the show, so created the character of Bester, and what a character. You know, it's definitely one of those which I think, as a recurring character, was probably one of the best. And just a
one
role.
thing I remember talking, this is a long number of years back, talking with Andreas Katsulis, and he mentioned that while he was playing Jakar, there was a number of times that the casting directors for Deep Space Nine were trying to get him to come back, because they wanted him to play an ambassador Tomalak character in Deep Space Nine.
Yeah.
And he's like, no, I'm not going to be able to do that. I have this over here. I have this over here. And they threw, from what he was telling me at one point, they threw gobs of money at him.
Oh, really?
To pull him off. And the way he said it was, he always thought that it was just a means to the end to try to remove one of the main star characters of Babylon 5, to remove some competition from him. because another thing that was going on is a lot of characters that played on Babylon 5 were getting tore and put on Deep Space Nine and vice versa. Like you have like General Haig, who then came on for Paradise Lost, Deep Space Nine. You had I'm trying to remember, there was a couple others that had been flipped back and forth. They were kind of doing both ends, and it was almost like they were fighting over a character or actors at times.
Yeah.
So, and like the original, this first season having Majel Barrett on there, I remember hearing from, I think I had heard it from Lolita Faggio, that was a big problem. Like Berman had a big issue with that originally. Was her jumping over there.
It was more so to do with Paramount and Trek production having a problem with B5 than B5 having a problem with the other way around.
Yeah, JMS didn't care. Like, even though he said he's on record as saying that he's pretty darn sure that his original pitch was used as a basis for some of what happened in Deep Space Nine. He's very much the first person to say, you know what, I don't care. I was still able to make my vision the way I wanted to make it. They weren't going to let me do that even if I got the job. So,
right, they would have just had a hold of it. I mean, Hollywood is full of that. One of the big stories that I always talk about as an example is Robin Hood. Robin Hood is open source, right? Anyone can make Robin Hood, right?
Yeah.
But the guy who wrote Robin of Sherwood with was season 2, I think it was Jason Connery. I can't remember the name of the first season guy, which ran on ITV. He wrote a screenplay, and he went after Robin of Sherwood aired on British TV and was quite successful. It aired over here as well. I remember watching it growing up. He wrote a screenplay, and he went to tout it over with the Hollywood producers, and he was turned away. Then suddenly, this movie was made and released, Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves. So as something that's quite close to his heart, he just said, I'm going to go see what have they done with this. And then he noticed a lot of similarities to what he'd written, and a lot of similarities to his particular script. So he was able to sue the company simply because one character who doesn't exist in the legend, but exists in only his creation of Robin, and that's the character of Kasim. Because they used the character of Kasim, he was able to prove that his script had been stolen. But of course, the Hollywood execs, thinking Robin Hood was Robin Hood and a legend, they had no clue what the actual legend was and the characters that are involved. So they didn't realize that Kasim was specific to that writer's story. So he was able to bring them in afterwards and get his money. But Hollywood does it all the time. There's loads of stuff that happens. In
I've heard. I remember hearing that as well. That
you have a very active dog that's going from this door to that door. It's very annoying.
You know, I have heard that as well myself. That the DS9 and some of the people there tried to scupper Babylon 5. They saw it as competition, and and as a fan of both shows, I'm glad that they failed. Obviously, particularly as I'm a huge bigger fan of Babylon 5, but I love both. And there's no doubt in my mind that what JMS says is true. There are so many similarities, particularly in the early stages of Deep Space Nine to Babylon 5. You know, I think as it ran its course, it developed its own personality, its own stand, its own personality, and became a show in its own right. But at the beginning, for the first couple of seasons, you know, all the indications were there that they had this copy of JMS's Bible, and they took a lot of ideas from it, you know.
And there's stuff in his Bible, because the other thing is too, when the show was coming out, he would release like snippets of the Bible, like that would be like innocuous, kind of like teasers, so to speak. Like I remember one of the things that he had released, it was before the episode aired. And the reason I remember all this because my grandmother was big into Deep Space Nine, huge not Deep Space Nine, sorry, Babylon 5. She was a huge Babylon 5 fan, and she used to go on to she actually learned how to use IRC and freaking ICQ and all of those different things to stay in contact with these people. And
the old-fashioned forums, but before forums became forums.
Yeah, but bulletin boards, stuff like that. She was huge into it. And I remember she put up this one. She's like, "Oh, they're gonna have an episode that's gonna make fun of the figures that they're coming out with." And it was the Londo when he had the "What is this?"
yeah.
And he had made mention of that, and it was in his Bible. Like they were gonna have like basically an ad for their merch in the show itself. And then that came out, and I was like, oh, okay. And then later on, and it was a long ways down, you had the Quark cups coming out of the replicators, and then the figurines that they showed, and it was like, wait a second.
Have they seen this already?
This is the same stuff they were doing there, and it's like there's a lot of those little
nods and winks,
innocuous things that it's like, why would you do that knowingly, like purposely, in making it to look like you're doing it? I don't know, but I think that really what it comes down to is JMS kind of took the high ground with it and said, you know what, I was able to make the story I wanted to make. They made a story that they wanted to make, apparently, using a lot of my ideas, but good for them.
Just going, Andrew's just saying here, Pat Talman appeared on the Defiant and Deep Space Nine.
Yep.
You know what? You'll find Pat Talman all over the 24th century. Pat Talman was a working stunt woman. She was Gates McFadden's stunt double in Star Trek Generations as well. When Worf pushes,
and in TNG.
TNG, yeah. She was Gates McFadden's stunt double for a couple of episodes, wasn't she?
Yeah, for DS9 or for Generations. When Worf or when Data pushes Dr. Crusher over the side, that's Pat Talman going into the
Yep.
This is a great quote that Andrew put up there. It's one of Jakar's greatest speeches. In season 2, no dictator, no invader can hold an imprisoned population by force of arms forever. There's no greater power in the universe than the need for freedom. Against that power, tyrants and dictators cannot stand. I think absolutely incredible scene there in with Jakar delivering those lines with such power. So I can understand why Deep Space Nine or Rick Berman and those guys might have tried to rob him from Babylon 5. He was such a central and incredible character, but I'm glad that they failed. Speaking of Pat Talman, and we said Sinclair or Sheridan, what about Talia or Lita?
I'm a fan of Pat. I like Pat she was great in the pilot, and I just thought I can't remember the production reasons why they went with Talia, there was other reasons where a lot of characters were replaced, a lot of actors were replaced, and I'm great that Pat actually got to come back later on the show. But yeah, I thought I quite liked Pat in the Gathering. But you know what? Back then, when I was watching it, I just accepted that she's been replaced. And the great thing about JMS and his writing, when those characters were replaced, at least they got a line, a hang a lantern on it line to say where that character gone. It's not like the pilot was another thing. Let's just kind of that was establishing stuff, but let's forget about it. Here's the new characters. Let's just talk about those. At least, this is the new transfer. Ivanova's the new thing. Pat Talman, she's gone off. And the doctor, I passed him at on IO. We had a good chat, and he told me about what's going on here. He's going to head up things back on Earth. So at least when they brought in new actors and new characters, those characters at least got some sort of lead out to their story. They just didn't, as happens a lot in episodic television. They just go, poof, here's the new actor, deal with it.
Yeah, absolutely. What about yourself, Russell? Lita or Talia?
It kind of varies a little bit. I liked Lita better. I liked her character a lot better. I think she played a better part, so to speak. She was able to bring the character to life a little better than I think Andrea did with Talia. But at the same point, Talia had her points. Talia had a harder to play character because she was supposed to be playing a character that had a second personality, so to speak, with the whole in what was it? What would you call it? The Psychor put in her brain another personality.
Right.
So she was like a sleeper agent. And then you have the relationship, which really, when you come down to like a conversation we were talking about before, was basically the first out lesbian relationship that we saw, was basically through Babylon 5. And the fact of like Ivanova being a latent telepath. And it's like, well, what about that? Does she have her memories of this? So there was a lot of like tiebacks they could have used that they never did. But personally, for me, it's definitely Lita Alexander. Just, I think her character was more human. Talia kind of came off as very, very closed off, very, very wooden, for lack of a better term. It just seemed very stiff. Whereas Lita had, points where she's like talking about later on, she's talking about the fact that like, oh, well, I'm not a Psychor anymore and the Vorlons are gone, so I don't have a place to live anymore. Like, and it's the same type of stuff you would expect to hear from someone in that same situation, like trying to figure out like the simple mundane stuff of like where I'm going to live, how am I going to eat, like what am I going to do.
Well, that's the thing, and again, that goes back to the kind of writing that JMS did for Babylon 5, where he dealt with the mundane stuff. You know what I mean? The everyday aspects of life. I mean, the first season, you see Sinclair and Garibaldi go and use the gents. You know, it's you never find out where the loos are on the Starship in Star Trek, but okay, yeah, they definitely got loos on the station on Babylon 5. But so he went into real world stuff as well, and again, that's life. People come and go. It's all part of life, but nobody has, as John said, disappeared without knowing why. You got that explanation as to the reason they've gone this direction or what's happened here, and you're not going to see them for a while. They come back, and and you get the background behind that as well. So again, fantastic. And I also would lean towards Lita. I think she's a more interesting character.
Going back to the two characters being in the toilet. You also have in the Gathering, I think it is, where they're going. Is it the Gathering or somewhere? They're taking a long trip. Maybe it's Babylon Squared, where they're taking a trip to Sector 14. But you have the whole fasten zip conversation.
Babylon Squared.
That's Babylon Squared, yeah. Zip fasten zip.
What are you talking about? Do you fasten or zip? Do you button first and then zip, or do you zip first and button then fasten? And he's like, your trousers. So, and they have that. I'm not discussing this, and then they end up just going on. Yeah, I'm fasten zip. Fasten zip.
Yeah. The funny thing is, Jerry Doyle used that with all his guests on his radio show, like in perpetuity. He like when they were off screen, he would always ask the first thing. He'd be like, "So I got one question for you: zip fasten or fasten zip?" And they'd be like, "What?" He's like, "Your pants in the morning when you put them on." Fasten zip or zip fasten?
Right. Yeah.
Great conversation there. All right. Andrew Ryan said that he would love to see how Lita would have fared in the telepath war. Yeah, so would I. One of my biggest disappointments, aside from the fact that it was cancelled with Crusade, because I was enjoying that show as well, is that it was 12 or 13 episodes it got. But the next episode, I remember reading, was to be an episode involving Bester and an exploration of the aftermaths of the telepath war. And I was like, oh my God, could I not have just done one more? I'd love to have seen that, oh yes, I remember that as well. And Caretaker guys, Mac and Bo calling White Stars plucked chickens.
Yeah, look like chickens.
Absolutely. Great stuff on well, here's another the big question, Frank. In regard, we've discussed. I remember panels upon panels, constantly discussing it back at the time, and on a couple of rewatches, I would say, what is your thoughts on season 5? And here, I'll start off by saying, season 5, part 1, is really tough to get through. Season 5, part 1, the first half of the 20 episodes, or 22, whoever it was, really tough to get through, because that was what was left over from season 4 that was squished out. But season 5 part 2 is great. It's great Babylon 5, and I think the first half of season 5 caused the rest of the season to suffer. But one of the best episodes in Babylon 5 is in season 5, and that's it's what is it? Is it Six Transit Veer? or
The Long Night of Nanda Malari, is it?
Long Night of London Malari. Thank you. That's exactly it. That's the best episode of the whole show, and it's in the weakest. It's like Buffy. Hush is in season 4, which is the weakest season of the whole show. It's where Joss was going off doing other projects. But Hush is one of the best episodes of the whole
Buffy?
season.
Never heard of it.
And but the Long Night of London Malari, fantastic. But
absolutely. I mean, my opinion on Babylon on season 5 is that we'd come off 2 amazing seasons. Season 4, where they found they had to wrap it up because they were getting cancelled, so they wrapped up the Civil War, the Earth Alliance Civil War, and then tried to complete their storyline and jump forward 20 years with Sleeping in Light, and then they got their last minute reprieve. But season 4 was meant to end in the episode where Sheridan is captured by the Earth Alliance and gets interrogated. That was meant to be the end of season 4. And then season 5, the first half of season 5 was going to be exploring the rest of the Civil War. And halfway through season 5, that gets resolved. And then it goes into the second half of season 5 that you're talking about, which is a fantastic Centauri storyline.
Season 5, part 1, the Telepath War,
was meant to be a B line. That was a B story. That was meant to be in the background during the Civil War story arc.
Right.
You know what I mean? So they had to sort of the Hobbit movies, where they had to expand on a small little book to make 3 movies, and this you had to expand on the Telepath story B arc and create an A arc out of it. And so yes, it's weaker. It's still better than a lot of other sci-fi shows, A arcs, let me say. But it does feel like a letdown because for season 3 and 4 were so intense, and then you get to the second half, and it's right back up there again.
The way I've always took it is just season 4. Season 4 got rushed because they knew they were going away, and they didn't want to leave the fans on a cliffhanger, middle of the war. They wanted to give them closure, so they gave them closure. And then we have Deconstruction of Falling Stars. That kind of gives a little bit more impression of like history repeats itself and everything along those lines. And then he's like, oh crap, TNT wants us. What are we going to do now? We got half a season we got to fill with something. Well, we'll try this telepath thing we were going to do as a beeline, and then expand it. So really what it comes down to is the reason it's so weak is they had to spend half the season unwrapping what they wrapped up. Right. It's just like when you move. It was tough. It was really, really tough. And I think they did a decent job of it. They didn't muck it. Like, look at Enterprise as a good example of halfway through storylines getting told you're going to be canceled and then jump out. Oh, we're not getting canceled yet. We got another season. We got a reprieve. Oh, now we're going to have this guy come in, and they're constantly changing people. Like, I think they did okay, but comparatively, I think JMS pulled it off a lot better.
Yeah, right. And that shows us his storytelling prowess. Frank, it's just hit 9 o'clock.
Yeah, we've been going longer than I expected. Just a couple of comments there, man. Andrew said he was in tears at Sheridan's speech aboard the Agamemnon when they came home to remove Clark from office. Absolutely fantastic. An amazing storyline, that whole Civil War, and the attempts to bring down the presidency there. It's fantastic watching it. For those who on Q Forward who are watching it for the first time after seeing our pilot episode watch, you've got so much to look forward to. John, as we're getting to that time, maybe it's time to kind of close off. We'll do a few final thoughts and wrap up. So,
I just after watching it tonight, I know what I'm going to stick into the DVD player right now. Good. I watched disc 1 of season 1 a couple of weeks ago when you were watching the pilot, because I watched the a while ago, and I watched Midnight in the Fireline, and I stuck it in and went, I'm going to watch that just because they're talking about it. And I ended up watching every episode on the rest of the disc. So I think this evening I'll do the same thing. I'll just stick in the next disc. And that'll be my evenings watching this evening as Babylon 5.
Yeah. Russell, what about yourself?
I'm actually still catching up on stuff, so I'm still finishing up Space Above and Beyond and Blake 7. So
right, Space Above and Beyond, another show that suffered greatly from interference. because it got its first half of the season as it was planned, and then they were constantly being threatened with cancellation. Then they got the second half of the season was commissioned. They were like, yay! And they continued on, and they did some really interesting stuff. But by the end of the season, they got cancelled, and I believe at the time Sliders didn't get cancelled, and they were like, well, hang on a second, we've got more fans talking about our show, and Sliders went for 5 seasons, and Space Above and Beyond went for 1. And I think there was a big thing between the writers on that, kind of going, what the hell, man? But Space Above and Beyond, another great show. It's such a pity. I'd love someone to pick that up again. That was a wonderful show back then as well.
Yeah, it's definitely.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, listen, guys, thanks so much for that. Before we just wrap up, we have Q Forward Wednesday evening talking about Buck Rogers in the 25th century. So Anne will put up the usual link there to have a chat about that. John, are you having a Makers Chat on Wednesday afternoon?
I'm going to have a look and see what we're doing on Wednesday. I have potentially someone to talk to, so we'll see. But I've got, again, construction going on, so we'll see. Hopefully
And I understand, Russell, that Ask Me Anything on June 30th has quite something coming up. Do you want to tell us anything about that before we wrap it up?
The AMA, it's more Region 7, but we have a captain from Region 7 of the, I think it's Stella Parada. And then we have Bob Vossler, who's been Starfleet historian. He's basically in charge of Starfleet archives, so he's basically our historian right now, but he's also the VRC in Region 7. And then we also have Jason Williams, the RC from Region 1, on for the AMA with the commander. And then if anybody's up, I mean, I know it's really, really early / late, depending on how you look at it.
Yeah.
3 a.m.
3 a.m. That's the name of the show. Ask Me Anything. So, you can come up with all sorts of questions for these guys to see what.
If you have questions, send them to me in a DM. And I will get them answered for you on stream, and you can watch it later and get your answers. So
awesome sauce. Well, all right, guys. Listen, thanks so much for that. It's always a pleasure for me to talk Babylon 5. I could go on for hours about it, as you can probably already gather.
I have to point out the time to you, Frank. I just was like.
No, I know. Yeah, I could just keep going with Babylon 5 for God knows how long. For me as well, I think I'll stick in a couple of Babylon 5 DVDs. I think I might stick on Call of Arms tonight.
Right.
Guys, because the Excalibur, love it. That's and Galen, such a fantastic character. That's another whole other conversation.
Yeah, right.
So, gentlemen, thank you so much, and be seeing you.
Seeing you. Take care, guys.
Take care, guys.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye. Bye.